It started, as these things often do, with something incredibly small. A thin strip of reflective tape, barely 3 inches wide, affixed to the side of a rural mailbox just off Route 9 in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. At night, the tape shimmered under headlights like a firefly caught in a jar. Harmless, practical, legal. And yet, it sparked a suburban Cold War that would end with one man transforming his entire home into a glittering monument to stubbornness and disco. But before we meet that man, we need to talk about Karen. Now, Karen isn't her real name, but if you've ever lived in a homeowners association, attended a PTA meeting, or dared to leave your trash can out 15 minutes past pickup, you probably know someone just like her. The kind of person whose identity is staked entirely on keeping the neighborhood looking respectable. A phrase that usually hides something far more controlling beneath the surface. Karen was a self-appointed enforcer. She wasn't on the HOA board, but she had the ear of those who were. She knew the bylaws down to the section numbers and wasn't afraid to cite them in all caps, whether she was filing a complaint or scrawling passive-aggressive notes in block letters on a neighbor's recycling bin. She was meticulous, relentless, and utterly without irony. So when Jim Haskins, a retired industrial designer with a fondness for gadgets and a habit of working late in his garage, added a small strip of reflective tape to his mailbox so delivery drivers could find his home more easily at night, it took less than 48 hours for Karen to file a complaint. The charge? Visual disruption. Yes, visual disruption. The tape, she claimed, was inappropriate for a family neighborhood, distracting to drivers, and ruining the aesthetic continuity of the block. Now, what Karen didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Jim was the kind of man who had once lost a job at an ad agency for refusing to change the shade of blue on a client's logo. Not because he was being difficult, but because he was being right. He was principled, meticulous, and just a little bit theatrical. So when the HOA board sheepishly informed him that indeed reflective tape was not in compliance with approved materials, Jim did something most people wouldn't. He didn't take it off. He doubled it, and then he tripled it. By the end of the week, his mailbox looked less like a receptacle for letters and more like the hood of a NASCAR. Karen, of course, was apoplectic, but Jim wasn't done. Not by a long shot. He'd spent the last 30 years designing product packaging, labels, surfaces, colors that pop off the shelves. He knew exactly what caught the eye and how to keep it. So when he realized that the HOA regulations were surprisingly vague about house exteriors, not colors, but materials, he had an idea. A very shiny idea. Disco ball tiles. Thousands of them. Now, if you're picturing those mirrored squares spinning above a dance floor in 1978, you're not far off. Except instead of a dance floor, imagine an entire 3-bedroom house covered in the stuff. Every wall, every soffit, even the mailbox post. From curb to chimney, the house transformed into a prism of mirrored light, catching the sun during the day like a lighthouse, and turning into a silent rave at night, moonlight flickering across the lawn. Neighbors started driving by just to see it. Teenagers filmed TikToks in front of it. Even the local news showed up. But this wasn't just about sparkle. This was about protest. Jim, it turns out, had a long history of pushing back against what he called suburban authoritarianism. He'd lived through the era of redlining, seen zoning laws weaponized against creative expression, watched as bland conformity became synonymous with good taste. To him, Karen's complaint wasn't just about tape. It was about control. And the disco ball house? That was his revolution. But it wasn't easy. He spent weeks researching materials. The tiles had to be weather-resistant, non-toxic, and not violate safety codes. He found a small supplier in Oregon that made mirror-finished acrylic squares used in stage design. They weren't cheap, but Jim had savings, no mortgage, and no intention of backing down. Every morning, while most of the block left for work, Jim climbed scaffolding with a caulk gun in one hand and a Bluetooth speaker blaring Bee Gees in the other. By the time he finished, the house didn't just reflect sunlight, it refracted it. It sent rainbows skipping across the lawn, bouncing onto neighbors' driveways, painting color on Karen's beige garage door. Which is when the second complaint came. This time, the charge was excessive light reflection, causing visual discomfort. But now the HOA was split. Some members thought it was funny. Others admired the craftsmanship. A few even started hanging up their own little mirrored decorations in solidarity. Karen was furious. She began documenting the house daily, sending emails with subject lines like, "Urgent, blinding conditions persist." But Jim, ever the professional, had anticipated every move. He'd installed motion-sensitive shades that lowered at night. He had a heat dissipation report showing the mirrors didn't raise the temperature of nearby homes. He even had a study ready, published in a peer-reviewed journal, showing that mirrored surfaces could reduce light pollution by bouncing ambient light downward. The HOA called an emergency meeting, and Jim showed up in a sequined blazer. He presented his case like it was Shark Tank. He showed schematics, quoted bylaws, referenced architectural precedents. He even brought photos of historic mirrored buildings from around the world. The reflecting pool at the Taj Mahal. The mirror house in Tokyo. When it ended, the vote was 5-4 in his favor. The house stayed. But that's not the end. Because here's the twist. 6 months later, Karen moved out. Her house went up for sale with a glowing Zillow description that conveniently omitted any mention of the mirrored neighbor. And Jim, well, he started getting emails from artists, architects, even musicians. Some wanted to photograph the house. Others wanted to feature it in documentaries. One band filmed an entire music video on his lawn. And then, unexpectedly, something changed. The house that was once a protest began to evolve. Jim started hosting small community events, disco-themed movie nights projected on the side of his home, fundraisers for local schools, solar-powered light shows for holidays. People came dressed in sequins and glitter. Strangers became neighbors. Kids played under the reflected light, chasing rainbows across the yard. Even the new couple that moved into Karen's old house, they joined in, hosting a Studio 54-themed block party that shut down the whole street for an evening of dancing and unity. The disco ball house had transformed from a symbol of defiance into something far greater, a monument to individuality, resilience, and the unexpected beauty that comes from challenging the status quo. Jim, now affectionately dubbed the Mirror Man by local papers, says he never set out to become a community leader. He just wanted his packages delivered. But sometimes revolutions start with reflective tape. And in a world full of rules written in small print and enforced with large egos, maybe a little sparkle is exactly what we need. Because here's the thing about light. It spreads. And so do ideas. So next time someone tells you that your creativity is too loud, too bright, too different, just remember the house that shined so brightly, even the haters had to wear shades. And somewhere in a quiet suburb, lit by the glitter of 1,000 tiny mirrors, A retired designer stands in his driveway, sunglasses on, humming along to Stayin' Alive, proof that sometimes the best way to fight conformity is to disco.